Okay, so sophomores, here is your assignment that we're doing this last week of school before break. We are still having class every day, so please try your best to get this done. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit so you can see it. Um, we're graphing power. So when you notice that Creon gains power, you would want to move him up the scale. So you see here we have 40 points total for Creon. Maybe you feel that because he is king and he sort of or definitely holds the cards over Antigone, or we think he does, let's say we want to put him at a 25. I personally, I thought about putting him, or I did put him at a 5. Someone in my fourth period said, yeah, but couldn't I put him at a 40 because he really is at the top of his game. He just took over as king. His city just won the Civil War. Yes, you could, but remember that he just had this moment with the spy, the sentry, where the sentry kind of provoked him and egged him on and showed us that that Creon wasn't as powerful as he says he is. So you decide where you want to start him and then where you want him to go based on your reading of the play in scene 2. So we're really only dealing with lines 300 to 465. We haven't even read past, I think, like 394. So if you want to read ahead on your own to decide, okay, what are some quotes that show me that Creon has power and that maybe he loses power, and then what are some quotes the same for Antigone at the end of the scene on your own, you can do that as well. We'll also go over the end of the scene in class. So basically this is a little different because it's blending math with ELA, and I'm not a math person, but I am a visual thinker, so this helps me to see how Creon is journeying or moving through the scene and how Antigone is and how they're changing not only themselves by their, how their power changes, but they are affecting and impacting each other, right? As one person maybe levels up in power and one responds or reacts by either going up or down. And this is an MCAS standard. So you're going to at least pull 5, if not 8, 10 questions on MCAS by your ability to spot, identify, and think about or analyze how one character changes over the course of a passage, of a reading passage, and how one character changes over the course in the passage as impacted or intertwined with another. And what does that mean? That just means how do two characters engage in a back and forth like Creon and Antigone in scene 2. It's like a tennis match, right? Creon shoots one and then she responds, and then he either goes up or down in power based on how she responds to him. And there are a couple of scenes or moments in scene 2 that I wanted to bring to your attention. So this is page 14. Remember that question marks, right? Question marks have a lot of power. Let me just find this one right here. So we have these 2 questions here, which I think is very interesting. So as I told some of you in class, when we debate or when we argue, we always want to attack our opponent with questions. We never attack our opponent unless it's in the form of a question. You'll notice that this happens in political debates. It's happening right here. And when Antigone responds, it's with another question. So think about how the power shifts and plays out just by the nature of Creon asking a question and Antigone throwing it back at him with another question. And think about what that does for her power. Maybe that, levels up for her like 5, 10, 15 degrees on that power scale. And maybe he stays the same, maybe he goes down. You could always say he moves up in power as long as you can back it up with evidence and that you can explain your evidence and how that plot point might suggest that he's going up in power versus down in power. So her first lines are really up here at the top with I do, I deny nothing on 13. But remember, she's been in the scene on stage, just standing there, starting at page 11. So the question becomes, why is she just standing there? Who is she standing with? Who are the people around her? There is a gender dynamic, certainly, male to female. There's a power dynamic, certainly, with the king, newly elected king, and chorus, right? Those are the elders, the judge and jury of the city. So already you get kind of this versus that, and she might be a little bit lower. Although someone said, they think of her as starting out high because of her referencing God's will and repeatedly calling on Zeus or God and saying that her decision was a result of God's law. So they're using that as evidence to say, no, I think she starts out pretty high on that power scale. I personally had her lower just because I thought that she was just standing there, and I assumed because she wasn't saying anything that was because she was A, a woman, and B, brought there to be in trouble. She was being admonished for her insolence, which is a vocabulary word, insolence, if you remember. Okay, so basically you are moving them across this grid. And just to show you here, you should have two different colors. You should have a color for Creon and for Antigone. I don't care exactly if the line numbers are on point, and I know mine actually is not because I move him here. I believe that he starts out at a 5. He then jumps up to maybe a 10 with lines 350 to 351 when he says, and you, Antigone, your head hanging. But look, this isn't, you know what I mean? This isn't exactly at line 350, 351. I don't care about that. As long as you show that there's two trends. There's the Creon trend and then there's the Antigone trend or line. And they may intersect. They may cross over. They may go up and down, or they may flatline or stay the same. And I just want you to track that by noting at least one quote for each plot point for each character on the scene. So it's divided into 7 sections. You should have at least 7 different plot points for each character. And I think you're going to find it really interesting. On the back of the assignment, it does ask you to make a prediction before you begin. How do you think your graph is going to look based on what you know of the scene so far, based on this back and forth power dynamic? Who do you think is going to be higher in power? Who do you think is going to be lower? When will they cross section? Are they, they're going to flip-flop. So just noticing, based on what you know, how this graph will look as compared to how it really turns out. Everyone's graph should be different. This isn't about all having the same plot points, because picture the points on this graph as claims that you're making, and claims should be arguable. And so my graph is going to look very different from someone else's graph. I do suggest that you write the quotes right on the graph, like I did right here, and it can be messy. I don't care about that. And we'll see where we get with this. Ultimately, I'd like you to create a statement that says, even though Creon blank, or even though Antigone does something, in fact, she does this, right? Does that kind of make sense? If not, I'll review that in class. But basically with that thesis, with that even though statement, you're taking a look at this and the work that you've done and the trends that you're noticing like a scientist, essentially. So this assignment is you being a mathematician, a scientist, and a literary critic. How about that?